Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Tech Founder Show. In this series, we have discussions with leading edge technology founders who are leading the charge of rapid innovation using disruptive technologies, and joined by my co-host, Andy, as always. How you doing, Andy?
Fantabulous. How about you, Tony?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward. Last week, we had our first international SaaS Founders Show, and today we have our first International Tech Founders Show. So that's
very
pretty
cool. So who do we have and what are we talking about?
Yeah, so we have Jacob Wedderburn-Day. He's the CEO and co-founder of Stasher. And Stasher is described as the Airbnb of luggage. Stasher is a sharing economy solution for storage, and pretty cool. So I'm going to bring Jacob on. Hey, Jacob, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good. How are you?
Also fantabulous. I like that word. I'm going to start using it.
It combines everything, right?
Yeah. A lot of positivity in that.
That's right.
So very cool. So we'd love to hear, Jacob, just tell us about Stasher, high level overview, and then we'll dive into some other aspects.
Sure. You described it nicely. It's a marketplace business where we give people an easy way to book storage. Probably the easiest way to explain it is I'll tell you very quickly about how we founded it. I'm 27, but we founded it when we were students. This is me and my co-founder, Anthony. We met studying economics together. This was at a time when Uber and Airbnb were becoming quite popular. Like they'd kind of gone from they were sort of niche ideas and suddenly they were becoming household names, and the sharing economy itself had kind of gone from the fringes to suddenly being quite mainstream. And we just loved that whole idea. We loved the sort of model. We found it all quite exciting. We used to chat about different things that we could apply it to. And then we totally got lucky with this because it happened that Ant lived in central London between King's Cross and Euston. I don't know how familiar you are with London, you and the audience, but those are two of the busiest stations in the capital. And so he always had requests from people saying, hey, do you mind if I just leave something with you quickly or for a week or so? And he one day just cracked a joke about I should start charging people for this. And we were like, wait a second.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. This is the opportunity. And the more we looked into it, the more we realized that storage in cities it's a genuine problem. It's a need that people have, more so because companies like Airbnb were becoming so popular and creating more and more of this problem. I'm sure you and everyone listening can relate to if you've checked out of doesn't even have to be an Airbnb, it's that last day of your holiday effect. The last thing you want to do is worry about your stuff. And so that was the origin of Stasher. That's where it came from. And I think that gives a good sort of sense of what we're about.
That's great. So solving a very real problem, just coming up with the solution on how to handle it. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think I've done that before myself, is you go to the hotel or somewhere else and you just drop something off. So, I mean, it's definitely something relatable to almost everybody.
It's true. It's one of those things, I mean, you probably get this less as an issue in hotels that are generally better able to accommodate your needs. But sometimes, I mean, to be fair, I've had it where I've stayed in hotels that are on the wrong side of town from where I need to be. Going into town, you don't want to then be worried about your stuff. It kind of kills that last day, and more so when you stay in vacation rentals and apartments and stuff, or crash with friends. So, as you say, it's a very relatable problem. It's one we experienced ourselves directly, and quite fun to sort of stumble across it with the right solution at the right time, really.
So how did you guys get started? How did you take an idea, that kind of epiphany moment, and actually turn it into a real product?
This was quite cool. We were a bit lucky here too, in that. So I was still a student. I was doing my master's at UCL, the University College London, and he just graduated and he was working at this digital marketing agency. Now UCL had this quite cool entrepreneurship program that was it was a 1 semester long, and the whole idea was take a business idea and turn it into a sort of proper business plan. So it was literally the perfect time for us. We're we have a business idea. This is good. So we went through this it was kind of like a competition, really, because the whole thing was built around you will pitch to a panel of judges at the end, and there was some prize money up for grabs. And we worked our way through that, and we found it quite a useful way to sort of organize our thoughts. Some parts were more useful than others. We got to the competition, got through to the final, got through to literally the final round, and then we came runner-up. We didn't win, and we were really annoyed. and actually, I think that was the perfect outcome for us, because that happening properly galvanized to being like, literally the next day we were like, do you know what? Forget all this sort of academic stuff. We're just going to build a website. We're just going to do it. Like we've thought about it enough now. We've kind of clarified our thinking. Let's just do it. And so there's a great tool. For anyone who has like a marketplace business idea, I'd highly recommend it. It was great for us back then, and I'm sure it's only matured as a product since. It's called ShareTribe, and it's kind of, I guess it's a sort of Shopify-esque thing, but for building marketplaces specifically. So we knocked up a website on ShareTribe in like a day. Started looking at how we were going to market it. That was an interesting challenge. We were quite lucky there that, and he was doing a sort of digital marketing role. So we set up some Google ads, and this was fun. This was a while ago, and it was a fairly niche thing, and no one else was doing this. So actually, we were able to run profitable Google ads, which anyone who's familiar with search engine marketing is like, that's not really a thing unless you have like super high lifetime values. So that was cool. We did a bunch of like posting in forums. Really, we were just doing our best to get the word out. And I should say, the very first iteration of the product, it was literally my flat and Anthony's flat. Those are the only two places you could book. And I remember going to friends and family and being like, can you sign up? Can I list your places? And plenty of them did, and some of them were quite funny because they were like, "I'm happy to support you, but can you set it so that no one can actually book? I don't want to actually your stuff." But yeah, that was it. That was the first step, right? It was just getting something out, and then when the customer started, that was the next phase of learning.
So I'm curious, how did you? I mean, you gave a little bit of an insight into how you started building out that network, friends and family, but how did you grow that, and what did that look like? Because I imagine that would be an important element in growing a nice big network.
It's a critical element, and as you like, if you've been on the website recently, you'll probably be able to tell this. It's we sort of pivoted away from that particular model in terms of, at the beginning, we sometimes we go by the sort of name of like Airbnb for luggage, which is, I guess, just like a simple what they do on the tin kind of explanation. But it was very literally that at the beginning, because it was like people were opening up their homes. And over time, we realized that didn't make sense for a few reasons. I had several personal experiences as a student of having to like run back from lectures early to let people in to pick up a bag for like a $5, and it's like, I don't mind doing this because I'm like, it's literally my business. But we just thought like, we can't see this necessarily scaling. People are a bit unpredictable. But on the other hand, you've got shops and hotels, right? Literally across the street from us, you've got places that have, if they have space, if they have reliable space, they also have opening hours, they have security features like CCTV. And actually, in the spirit of the sharing economy becoming more popular, they're all very interested in ancillary revenue streams that they can earn. This was like, I don't think this would have worked back in 2000. Like in the year 2000, it would have been too weird. But we kind of, when I talk about the timing being lucky, I think it's that. I think it was a sort of confluence of a lot of different factors, and this was the right time for this kind of product to make sense. So we shifted totally from signing up people's homes, started focusing on shops and hotels, and that was when it really started to take off, because then suddenly we could like set up inventory all over the city, not have to worry about whether people would be in or not. And then when you start getting like chains, you start getting into like shop chains, and then ultimately hotel chains. Hotels obviously took a little bit more time because I had to build up more credibility before we could really approach them with it. But that was a really key moment, I think, in the history of the company.
I think it's pretty interesting because I think one of our last shows we talked about like bigger companies paving the way in that there's an idea that's a little bit out there, and it wasn't until they got popular that someone else was kind of able to ride the coattails of it. And it sounds like that's a scenario for you in some ways.
Oh, I'd say that's totally true. I think quite literally our business wouldn't have been possible without the success of Airbnb. Partly because Airbnb has created so much demand, but I think also it popularized that sort of sharing style model really, and kind of engendered that level of like trust in services like ours that made it possible to function.
I'm always interested in these like sharing / community marketplaces. You've got two audiences to build. So you've got to find the folks that, will store luggage, and then you have to find people interested in storing their luggage. What's the challenge of trying to build two audiences at the same time, and attracting one when you may not have much of the other?
Yeah, it's a classic chicken and egg problem, right? It's that thing of like, if you don't have any supply, you can't really get demand. But if you don't have demand, then the supply aren't that interested. We're slightly lucky in terms of our dynamic is that, well, there's a couple of things. I mean, the first one that's key is one host can serve many customers for us. So like one hotel can serve loads of customers, which is actually kind of unique. Like if you think about Airbnb, it's really like one host can only serve one guest. So you've always kind of got that restriction. Whereas in our case, we could sign up like a great hotel in Charing Cross and they can serve like hundreds of customers a day, which means there's less pressure to get tons of supply. It's actually becomes a kind of quality over quantity thing. So that's quite nice as a feature. It sort of makes it a bit faster to get going. And I guess the other thing is because our marketplace is, it's like I talked about it being like ancillary revenue. So shops and hotels have their own core businesses, and they're always going to be more focused on that. But Stasher is a really nice service on the side that generates like extra income, and I think we'll definitely come to this later in the show. But like in a sort of post-COVID era for hospitality, stuff like that's going to be more valuable than ever in terms of you just like something that can supplement your income, especially when it's unpredictable, becomes more and more valuable. But because it's an ancillary revenue service, I think that makes it quite valuable in terms of it's easier for us to sign up supply and there's less pressure to immediately deliver results. Like hotels don't tend to mind if we sign them up and they don't get any bookings like in the first few days, because when the bookings do start to come through, as I said, it's not their core business focus. They're like kind of anything is kind of a bonus really. And I mean, it's worth mentioning it doesn't cost hosts anything to register on Stasher. The model is sort of pure partnership. We only succeed if they succeed. If they don't get bookings, we're not charging them anything to be there. So it's kind of all done in that sort of win spirit.
I'm curious, how did the pandemic impact the business?
Yeah, as you can imagine, pretty negatively. So, it's as like to break it down. I mean, well, there's a few things to mention. One, we were very, very lucky. We raised a round of financing in January 2020 before the pandemic was really on our radar at all, which is kind of great. Like it meant that the pandemic didn't affect any of the terms of the round. And we were then like, we kind of entered this thing feeling quite financially secure. It was obviously a bit sort of shaky to begin with. It was a bit scary, like suddenly seeing. I remember we did like a forecast model at the end of February when it was starting to look more and more worrying, and we were like, okay, what happens if 2020 is only as good as 2019? And oh god, if that had happened, that would have been a dream, right? Like, and that was our worst case scenario back then. Obviously, what actually happened was, on the one hand, we had shops and hotels that were like either sort of pausing or completely going bankrupt, and then on the other hand, no one's really been able to travel. So it's really kind of put us into hibernation mode. In some ways, I think that's. I mean, it is bad. I'd obviously prefer that not to be the case, but considering how things could have gone, I think it's not bad that it was quite a clear-cut decision for us. Like when it happened, we didn't really waste time trying to pivot. We didn't sort of burn money trying to think like, how can we salvage things? We looked at it straight up and we were like, yeah, this is going to hurt us from both angles. Let's just be sensible about this. We've got cash in the bank. Let's preserve as much of that as possible. The one thing that made it quite stressful originally was we just hired a really great team sort of in the wake of the round. Culture and team and all that. It's like we're a small team, but that kind of I think makes it a really key part of it. So we were desperate not to have to let anyone go and not jump the gun with that. And I think it's lucky that we didn't, because then, oh, sorry, there's a siren going off in the background here. It's lucky that we didn't, because then the UK government, in our case, came out with like the furlough schemes that allowed us to retain all our employees. And So yeah, we kind of, between sort of government support and just having funds in the bank, we've been able to ride it out kind of fine. And then I guess in some ways the most painful part is just like, it's just the waiting. It's just like, I eager for it to come back. Would love to have sort of more to do with it, but I think we just have to kind of be patient and take everything in context, really.
So what has the upticks, since looked like? Have things, started to return back to the pre-pandemic activity? Or, how are you seeing that, progress?
It's happening, but it's a bit slow. There are certainly green shoots. I mean, we're live internationally, so we've been, we there are parts of the world we still haven't reached, and we're planning to do Asia and South America in the last round that we haven't yet got around to. But Australia actually has been doing relatively well for us the whole way through. The USA, we saw significant pickup as different restrictions eased across different states. The UK and Europe have obviously, following international news, I'm sure you appreciate, have been much slower. The UK started to get there now, but hospitality doesn't open up here till next month. And Europe, I think, is just kind of, is operating on an even more lagged basis. And obviously for us, Europe and the UK were kind of the core base. We just end of 2019 was when we were launching Australia and the USA. So it would be nice to have a stronger foothold there. And we've been trying to kind of direct our various efforts in those places. But yeah, truthfully, I mean, we're still somewhere like sort of 10 to 15% of where we were in 2019 at this point in the year. So there's a long way to go. And I think international travel is kind of key to unlocking that, really. We'll see more this summer, I'm sure. Between domestic travel and stuff, we'll definitely get a boost. But I guess, realistically, it's hard for me to do this because I'm naturally extremely optimistic, but being as sort of pessimistically realistic as possible, however you want to call it, I think we're probably looking at 2022 being back to 2019 levels and then go from there. So
we always talk in my entrepreneurial circles, these difficulties and challenges just teach you more stuff better. So you just got to find the positivity in it. But
yeah.
We've talked to a couple founders about the impact of the pandemic on their business. And the one thing that we haven't talked about is, and I don't know if you have any insight, is what was the reaction of your investors towards you and the business? What were they, coming down and going, what are we going to do? Figure this out? Or were they more receptive? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. I think we have quite great investors, really. We've generally picked investors that were former entrepreneurs themselves rather than guys who sort of have traditionally more finance background. And I think particularly last year that really paid dividends in the sense that I think they were generally very, very sympathetic and understanding. I think the other thing, if I'm to sort of blow our own trumpets a little bit, that we got right was we kind of got out ahead of it with them. So I don't know if you've talked about this with other founders, perhaps. Do you remember Sequoia wrote this open letter to their founders, the Black Swan one, in February? For anyone who's not familiar, it was just this very punchy letter that they then published more widely. That was basically to the effect of COVID. This is going to be a pandemic that's going to be a once in a generation thing. Actually, I mean, ironically, they've done the same thing when the 2008 crisis happened. So 2 once in a generation events happening pretty quickly. But they kind of hit all the nails on the head there, really. They were get out ahead of this, organize your cash flow. If you run out of cash, that's it. So that's got to be your number one priority as founders. Look at opportunities in the crisis. Think about all these things, get your team sort of in the right mindset. And I think it was cool. We read that at the right time, kind of did all those things before our investors had a chance to reach out to us. We were going back to them saying, all right, we're concerned about this and these are the forecasts that we've done. Obviously we got the forecast all totally wrong, but it kind of didn't matter. We were able to sort of reevaluate and reassess. We were kind of proactive again about calling a board meeting fairly early doors. So once the furlough scheme and all that kind of stuff was once there was a sense of sort of calm and when we kind of gone through the crisis, we called a board meeting, said, all right, we've done all these things. what do you want us to sort of think about? And truthfully, there wasn't at that point an awful lot we could do other than just kind of keep a finger on the pulse, keep in touch with our main sort of clients and the team, and kind of ride it out. And I think it probably paid us a lot of favors that we did that proactively at the beginning, because then our investors have actually been very cool. Like the rest of the year, they've always kind of had a sense of like, these guys know what they're doing, to the extent that we do. and that trust has actually been really nice. It's been really reassuring to have those guys kind of have our backs. And it's interesting. I'm waiting to see how that changes as things pick up. I think we're still, because like most of them we're European based, there's still a sense that we're not quite out of the worst of it here yet. But I think as that happens, I'm kind of looking forward to that tone changing and getting more optimistic. But no, it's been okay. Thanks for asking. It's been all right.
So with obviously the downturn and activity, over the last year, have you and your team, have you guys used this as a time to do some strategic planning and kind of work on the business and look at the future? And I'd just be curious, how that time has been spent and what that all looks like.
Yeah, I think we've done a few things actually. One's a bit unusual, but it's quite cool. Yes, is the short answer. Like we've kind of had to like basically reassess with every news cycle what the future timelines look like. But at least like we had product market fit, and therefore the direction of the business is kind of clear. We know we need to sort of, one, keep in touch with and reactivate our old hosts, but two, like look to sign up new ones, look to expand the network. Marketing has been something we've by and large been able just to sort of pause spend on. So that's really kind of a case of like thinking about how we want to do it in the future and being ready to turn that on when it happens. Generally, that's been a split between paid advertising, I'm talking like search, Google, social, that sort of thing, and then partner referrals. Partner referrals is kind of mostly travel companies who are in the same boat as us. So it's kind of just a case of staying networked, right? And then a key one there is just like reducing technical debt. So going through the product, like taking this as an opportunity when it's not, like normally, we hesitate about pushing changes until like sort of quiet periods of the evening, because you just don't want to disrupt anything when there's going to be people in the checkout flow. But generally nowadays we're like, we can push it whatever time of day, it doesn't really matter. So we'll have to get less relaxed about that when things turn around. So that's kind of the stasher answer to that is, we've kind of looked at the business fundamentals and made sure they're all ticked off. So the unorthodox thing that we did was basically in the first lockdown, and I'm talking here like March to June last year, we were like, we'll take this as a bit of a rare time off. We'll do this to strategic stuff, but I think it's kind of unusual as founders to, we just raised a round. We've been running like 100 miles an hour. It's kind of rare to have a little bit of time, just like pause and reflect, and like it took a bit of time off really, which was kind of nice. Things started to pick up a little bit in the summer, and then the second wave obviously loomed. And at that point between us as well, so me and my co-founder sat down and we were like, the next 6 months are just going to be quite hard because of lack of things to do, really, more than anything else. There's a lot of fundamental things that we can keep ticking over, but the stuff I described, even if it sounds like a lot, just kind of isn't. So we've ended up completely starting something new on the side, and this was sort of intended as a side hustle, and it's now going quite well. It's sort of taking up a more meaningful chunk of time. It's a project called 3 Points, and it's a little sustainability social enterprise. The product we've ended up with there, and it's kind of just been like an accelerated version of like the iteration and testing stuff that we were doing with Stasher. That all those learnings like took years. We've kind of like condensed into this like more recent 6-month lockdown sort of period. So we've basically ended up building an API that businesses can use to integrate like sustainable actions at either checkout or point of download or whatever like that. So the kind of thing where if you see plant a tree at checkout, our API kind of handles that pretty seamlessly. It sort of does all that sort of stuff in the background. You can make all this carbon neutral. You can recycle plastic bottles, these kind of things. So yeah, that's the 3 Points. That's been a complete diversion, nothing to do with Stasher. That was just something to like keep the team busy and occupy our time, and actually ended up being kind of successful and quite a lot of fun. We did a big launch last week for Earth Day, got a bunch of sort of fairly like meaningful clients on board running integration, and now we're going to have the fun problem of like allocating time as as things pick up. So there are worse problems to have, to be fair. But.
You talked about using a third-party tool for your MVP to build, and I'm kind of curious. So, did you end up rebuilding on your own platform after that, or did you continue to use that third-party tool?
So, in Stash's case, the tool we used was called ShareTribe. We stuck with that for the best part of the first year, and then around the time we raised our first kind of pre-seed round of funding, we took tech in-house and built our own custom tool. With 3 points, what's interesting is the state of that kind of technology has evolved to the point that no-code tools have actually become so accessible. So the API is obviously that's custom built, and we've done that in Python, but the website that sort of functions around the API is actually complete no-code, and we're using something called Bubble for that. And it's actually, I love being in tech for just kind of seeing these advances, because I really think no code has the potential to unlock a genuine wave of entrepreneurship. Coding, I think, is one of those things that's actually it's been a real barrier to entry. I talk to so many founders who have they have good ideas and just have their first question to me is always how do I find a tech guy? How do I if they aren't a tech guy, it's how do I find a tech guy? And I do think in our experience of just knocking together 3 points, it bypasses that. It really overcomes that hurdle. It's super exciting to see how far that technology has come. And genuinely, I used to think of no code as being kind of drag and drop, sort of very basic. But if you take a look at the 3 points website when you have the time, 3points.green, and I'm not really praising myself. We've got some brilliant designers who've done it and made it look so good, but it looks slick compared to what you'd imagine.
How do you decide, what to build? Because I think some founders that I talk to, they want to build a full app instead of an MVP, which is obviously a challenge. You didn't go that way, but then when you did build it, how did you guys figure out what the best feature set was to launch with and put your time and money into?
It's the sort of perennial challenge of product development, isn't it? It's I'm a big fan of MVP, iterate, test, learn. It's kind of the lean startup playbook, which we sort of did by accident before having actually read the lean startup. I read that a couple of years into the journey. But I feel there's something kind of natural about if you rush to market, or not even rush, if you go a little bit slow to market with what you imagine as a fully fledged product, you still ultimately need to take customer feedback into account in refining what it looks like. There's no way you're going to launch something that's sort of finished and flawless. And if that's the case, then you basically need to kind of step back and be what is kind of, the reason they call it MVP, right, is minimum viable. It's what's the, I've heard other sort of definitions that I quite like. I've heard minimum delightful product, which I think is quite a pleasing term for that kind of takes into account the fact, okay, an MVP might be really bare bones, but an MDP has I guess more of a sense of design about it, a flavor of this is what the product could be, but you're not going to pack it with features. I'm a big fan of that method of doing things, just because I think otherwise there's a real risk of over engineering, to be honest. There's a risk of building stuff that people don't need, and it's helpful to identify the stuff that they like and kind of build off of that rather than anticipate what it might be. And I think it's better to do it that way. So that ethos has guided both sets of product development that we've done.
Yeah, and I think that mentality's become more standard. Most of the founders that we have talked to on the show talk about that MVP, slow, agile, lean, approach. But I remember years ago, I would have folks come to me more often and had this big vision for what they would develop. And so I now that you say it, I kind of think the mindset's probably just evolved really well over the last X number of years, that people really get that a lot more.
I think so. And I mean, you're definitely not wrong about the vision piece, because I think that's kind of, it's fundamental, I guess, mostly to like raising money, raising finance. People always look for that kind of big ambitious vision, but I think even just for like inspiring a team, hiring, selling to customers, like all stakeholders to some extent, people like to feel part of a mission, right? They like to feel part of something. And I think with Stasher, that's always been the sense of like, we want to build a simple product that's really helpful. It's new. It was like a new original concept, but people really like it. I mean, I think it's quite unique in having such overwhelmingly positive reviews, and it's quite a lean kind of product. Like it's the kind of thing we built with a team that was never bigger than 20 people. And yeah, it's kind of fully international, live in like 250 cities. And I always really loved that about it. I always really loved how scalable it was. And with 3 points, I mean, the mission is even clearer, right? Because I think climate change kind of sells itself as a mission. Like anything that's sort of working to resolve the climate crisis is something I think that, that's only going to become a bigger theme. It's going to be something that people care about increasingly. And I imagine most of your audience are fully clued up and care deeply about it already. So being able to sort of build a tool that's albeit a small part of the much bigger problem is, I think, something people find incredibly motivating. So having that big vision is really important, but I think I don't think it contradicts starting small. I think they're sort of, it's just a kind of journey from like test design through to like, okay, but here's that kind of guiding principle. This is where we want to get to. So
Jacob, you mentioned that you had a really strong team in place, and luckily you were able to hang on, retain your team and the talent that you had. What does the team look like? I would love to hear about the roles and some.
Yeah, it's reduced a little bit, sadly. I think even with the best sort of efforts of the government schemes, it's difficult to retain like talented people in a situation where things are quite. It's actually, to be fair, this is one of the reasons we ended up spinning out 3 points as well. Was just like, you need something to occupy it. Like smart people, I think, don't do well just being told to sit at home and watch Netflix, right? So we've got a team at the moment. We have a team of like 4 in terms of sort of tech and product. 5 or 6 if you include us as the co-founders. You've got business guys as well, which are sort of split between like kind of sales and marketing in a sort of content sense. Generally very young. I think our average age is like 25, 26. Probably that's a symptom of us kind of hiring a little bit in terms of like maybe even in our own image, like looking for people that like are kind of young, hungry sort of grads, and then kind of training them up rather than going in for experienced people. That may or may not be a mistake, but it seems to have worked for us. I think it's certainly fed into like a really positive team culture where you've got a lot of young, smart people who feel quite motivated to come in and work with each other every day. And yeah, that's something that we've really like. Over time, we've become more and more deliberate about fostering that as well. I think in the early days, it sort of happened a bit more naturally, and we didn't. Culture, I think, sounds like quite an abstract concept when you sort of study it before you kind of come to like actually sort of nurturing it and experiencing it. But I think it's it's probably, when it comes to sort of at least retaining talent, if not hiring it, it's probably one of the most important aspects. It's just really creating a place that people feel like they can do productive work and enjoy it.
Yeah, I find culture always one of those, we have people that come in and interview with our company and they go, how's the culture? And for me, it's always been that word means something different to everybody.
It can be vague, it can be hard to define.
How have you, talk about that a little bit? Like, what do you see as culture from a founder leadership position? And, what does it mean to you versus you think some of your people and how they view culture?
Excellent question. Difficult to answer. There's a phrase I heard that I think probably rings quite true, even though it's a little bit blunt, which is just that culture is the result of who you hire, fire, and promote. So in some sense, it sort of says that culture is just kind of like the culmination of like the way you sort of reward people or remove them. More specifically to our case, I've seen like a lot of companies do that kind of three values thing, three word values. So we designed that for Stasha too, and I think that works. It's kind of, I mean, it's not like plastered over the office or anything, but we always talked about like smart positive action. So we said it was like our first value is, we want people who are sort of not just prepared to work hard, but work smart. Like they'll be efficient about stuff. Like if we give them a task, they're not going to just sort of sit there and manually sort of do, like they'll think of like, oh, how can I automate this? Like, clever ways to approach the problem. Positive, I think, is key. I think you really do want to fill an office with people who have that sort of energy and optimism and belief. And I think especially startups, especially small companies that have that kind of taking on the world vibe about them, you need positive people to make that happen. It's that's not going to come from a group of pessimists. And I think positive people, again, make it a fun place to work and a happy place to be. And then action speaks to the fact that we prefer people to have a sort of bias to action over kind of just like, we don't want people who are going to sort of think and postulate ideas and just kind of like write about stuff and not just actually get on and do it. I think for us, again, it's that startup mentality of like, to make things happen, you kind of have to actually make them happen. Do stuff, right? It's not going to happen just from being talked about. And therefore, we want people who have that sense of initiative, who are going to come in and be like, here's an idea, let's test it out, let's try it out. And I like those three values. I think they've served us fairly well in terms of like a guide to hiring, and I think and retaining and promoting and all that. I think the people that have done the best at Stasha are the ones that tend to exemplify those three values particularly.
Have you had to do the hire slowly, fire quickly scenario, where have there been people that haven't fit, and were you able to do that tough thing that I think most founders have trouble with, which is, cut the pain when it's early rather than sit there and let it fester?
Yes, is the short answer. But I tell you what, it's very tricky to fire people on the basis of culture fit. And it feels like it shouldn't be, because I do think it's extremely important to get that right. But it's far easier to fire people on the basis of like, you're not performing well, than it is to be like, I don't know. It always feels more challenging to kind of do it on the basis of like, it doesn't feel like you're a great culture fit. But it is really, really important. And maybe that's just, maybe that's just something that over time we'll become more comfortable with doing. Hire slowly, I think, is wise. We've definitely had it where we've kind of rushed hiring in the past and kind of come to regret it. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that sense of like, a hire is a significant investment. You just in, not just financially, but like in terms of time and training and stuff, you ideally do want people who are going to last years and provide a lot of value to a company and be fun to work with. But yeah, certainly firing fast is something that we've got more comfortable with over time in terms of like, the first person we fired, I remember, was such an uncomfortable experience, probably for everyone involved, but yeah, it's a kind of milestone, I guess, you have to cross as a founder, and over time I think you get more professional about dealing with it, but it's the advice is certainly true.
So Jacob, what would you say the next 12 months looks like, assuming that there continues to be an uptick in activity and tend to return, especially like this summer, a little bit of a pickup. What does the next year look like for you guys?
It's gonna be interesting. It's I'm still very, very hopeful and like optimistic about the return of travel. It's completely subject to restrictions. It's funny. I often get people asking me like, when you're coming back and like, and what do you look at? And I think we look at like leading travel indicators every month around sort of like hotel occupation, airlines and all that. But the truth is it's completely subject to government rules and international rules. And I think as soon as that happens, it's going to unlock. I really do think you may have heard people talk about the phrase revenge tourism, which I kind of love. I think there's going to be a wave of that. I mean, I'm speaking now purely from personal experience, but I know I can't wait to go traveling as soon as I'm able to. Hopefully that's a feeling that a lot of people relate to as well. We shall see. Basically, as and when that happens, I think we've got enough of the sort of core Stasher crew in place that things will turn back on fairly quickly. I'm looking forward to hiring again. I'm looking forward to being able to sort of rebuild the parts of the team that we've lost and ultimately sort of go past that point. As to when it happens, it's hard to say. In some ways, the blessing for us, therefore, is that we've also got this 3 Points project that's keeping us so busy. That's super exciting. I'm really interested to see where we take that, because it's kind of gone from being a bit of like a sort of pet side hustle to actually feeling like it kind of has legitimacy as a business in its own right. And at some point, we'll kind of have to formalize how we sort of divide that and split out sort of who's working on what. But yeah, my hope is we can take 3 Points to a place where it's a little bit more autonomous and kind of functioning as a business without so much sort of need for us to like kind of completely manhandle it the way that we do with us, like incubate it like an early startup. And then then it's going to be fun, man. Then we're going to have two things to kind of run. Luckily, there's two of us. That makes it certainly a lot easier. And I'm excited. The pubs opened up in the UK 2 weeks ago. Honestly, the last 2 weeks have been so much fun. Like the real semblance of life kind of returning to normal. So I think whatever happens with both businesses, the support's been pretty great, and it's going to be a lot of fun. It's certainly going to be a lot better than last year.
That's great.
A lot of I'm curious about the two products, because just from a standpoint of when we talk to folks, it's like, well, you got to narrow and focus, or else you're going to be too distributed. But there are definitely founders who have that mindset of, let's put some couple things out there. Let's, use our talents and go about it, versus that kind of make sure that you keep your blinders on. I don't know. Where's your, I mean, obviously you started a second one, but it was driven a little bit by this pandemic. But what's your feeling on this, agile startup? You can try different things versus focusing in and saying we've got to dig in and like make this one thing successful.
It's a really unique circumstance, I think, because a business like Stasher, it's mature and it's got product market fit, and we have like, in terms of the team that we've built already, even though we're distributing some of the time really over 3 Points now, we know that we've got good structure in place there. Like it's the kind of thing that it's a machine that we can kind of turn back on and it'll get running again. And I think that's kind of unique, because normally, normally you wouldn't be splitting time. Like that kind of business would be fine. It's pretty rare that that's like been pushed into hibernation. 3 Points is obviously, it's much more like early days, early stage. It's kind of fresh, exciting. They're like, it's the kind of thing right now where internally 3 Points needs a lot of focus. Like we still need to establish product market fit there. We need to get that to a place where we know what people want, and before we can sort of scale and double down. I guess, I mean, just personally, me and my co-founder are quite high energy guys who like the challenge, to be honest. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm kind of optimistic about both of them. I think there's a lot to be said for focus, and I think that applies particularly in the early days when you are still seeking out that product market fit piece, because I think there's a real danger at that point. I mean, you want to test multiple things. You want to find product market fit, obviously, but there's a real danger of trying to spread yourself too thin and actually therefore not achieving anything. I think what luckily for us makes us kind of unique is Stasher is already, it will be back in a really good place. It's just kind of waiting for like the environment to change. And hopefully that happens in the kind of time frame where we can get 3 Points to a place where that functions more like Stasher and it's more independent and autonomous. And then, then we'll have sort of two businesses to co-manage, but with a bit more structure and sort of clarity in terms of where both of them are going. Because Stasher has that very clear vision. With 3 Points, that's what we're still working out. So we shall see. It'll be fun.
I've found over the years I've had to like manage my shiny object syndrome. I think like a founder, that thing that just is over here and it's real shiny, and you kind of change your direction and then you go back. And so, I mean, it took me a couple of years to start really like being able to manage that, because like you said, when you're a higher energy person or you've got a lot of ideas, it's easy. I mean, everybody can come up with ideas, and some people are just like a mile a minute with that stuff. So it can be hard.
No, I can totally relate to that. And I guess the thing that's key for us, I suppose, is like focus on enough of the stuff that works. Give yourself like a portion of time for like the kind of moonshot stuff, the shiny stuff, like because it's I think it's healthy to indulge a certain amount of that. But yeah, as long as I think once you've got that roadmap of what works and you kind of get to more of a sort of like rinse and repeat stage, it gives you that kind of clarity. Gents, sorry, I just noticed my battery's running a little bit low. I can go get the plug if we need more time. Sorry, I don't want to cut you short.
Yeah, if you want to go grab it, do it.
Bear with me then 1 minute.
A couple more minutes.
I should have thought and brought it with me. So apologies. 1 second.
See, you just gotta roll with it, right, Tony?
That's right.
If only there was some sort of product that, I don't know, I'm trying to think to make sure that you remember to have your battery plugged in at all times. I don't know. That's why our one client that did wireless charging, where it was just up in the corner and it would send energy vibes to your devices and just, make you charge. You don't even need a cord.
That's a super cool concept. If we had commercial breaks, this would be a good time for one. But
yeah, we need to. What's something that you want to pitch? Look at this. We're back.
We can move over to where the plugs are.
This is fun. Look at this. We're getting like a tour.
Yeah,
we're gonna start doing that with other founders. Is make them carry around their laptop and give us a tour of their offices or home.
Okay.
Andy, Tony, this is our bathroom. Think about it.
Crib.
Pretty great.
I'm back. Sorry.
No, it's all good. So I'm kind of curious, outside the pandemic, what has been the biggest like challenge or roadblock or thing that you faced in trying to build a business?
Woo. Yeah, you've taken the obvious answer. I think, do you know what? And I think this applies to both of them. It's it kind of comes down to trust and credibility, really. And with Stasher particularly, just because of the nature of the business, like it was like a storage model, but like people are a bit sensitive about even giving away their personal data. So like when you talk about looking after their personal property, it's like a whole new level of trust is required. And that was, in the early days especially, that was a real sort of hurdle. And we had to loads of people, you get that early adopter thing. I'm sure you've seen that graph, like the early adopters through to like the sort of mainstream adoption. And, I've got so much time for early adopters. I think they're the best people in the world because these are the guys who are just like prepared to try something out with like no reviews, no proof of concept. That's like, hey, this is cool. And I love that. And they gave us enough traction that we were then able to build in things like, add insurance. And then you start working with more trusted brands, like recognized hotel chains, like Holiday Inns and stuff like that. And then it kind of snowballs. I guess that's the ultimate answer is there's no, like there are single things you can do that are like little step changes, but there's no one thing that kind of suddenly makes you trusted. But you kind of look back at that point in time, like, we look back now 5 years on and we're like, wow, we've got 20,000 5-star reviews and we work with all these big brands and we have this great insurance deal and all this stuff and like very, very, very few insurance claims. And, suddenly you're like, oh, it's actually all fine. But I think especially, and maybe this is a symptom of being young as well, as a founder, but like it just convincing people on that credibility piece, I think is a challenge, I think, in any business and just kind of winning consumer trust. Same certainly will be true for Treat Points. That's going to be, there's a different angle to that, which is just around like sustainability more broadly. And I think it's such a hot space and there's so much being talked about and people don't yet have, like, there's not like clear consensus on what the sort of, there are things that people have consensus around what we should do, but it's like, yeah, it's getting that right, I think, and making sure that we communicate that effectively. Again, there's a sort of credibility piece to be had there. So that, I don't know if that's the kind of answer you're looking for. I guess that's a bit vague, but
I think the credibility piece is huge. Just and thinking of my own personal story, when I started when I was 22 years old, I remember the first year of the business, I had people and clients being like, well, what happens if you're out of business in 6 months? That doesn't happen anymore, but I mean, that's how people think. And like you said, the early adopters versus people that require like credibility, because there's probably people out there that fear like, what if I give you my money and my stuff and it's just gone and you're gone? So
yeah, that's true.
And I think that relates to any software startup is you got to build some of that credibility before a big group of people are really going to come in and adopt at the end of the day.
Yeah, it does become a little bit like building a ladder, doesn't it? You kind of have to go like one rung at a time, and then eventually you're like, oh, it's a pretty decent sized ladder now. But like, even to like, you can't like, we couldn't have gone straight from like day one to like getting investment. We had to sort of go through like different hurdles to kind of get to example.
I mean, the biggest one, funding gives people some credibility that if they've, even if they don't have the customers, if you can say that we raised $6 million, that's somebody that, that helps too.
Yeah, totally.
So, there's a question that I always kind of ask founders, and it's a little bit like the challenges question that we just talked about, but I always want to know if you were able to go back and have coffee with yourself, a year before you started this business, what is like the one piece of advice that you would kind of give future you or past you, I guess?
Good question. Really good question. That's a tough one. Because I suppose I'm saying that just because I hope this doesn't sound too corny, but it's like the process of kind of making the mistakes that we made have kind of got us to this point, right? Like you kind of need to go through some of those sort of knocks. I think one thing I'd have told myself, and we didn't really talk about this, but I think like we had that classic like early co-founder who never quite sort of committed but was around for a while, like that whole dynamic thing. And I think if I could tell myself to be like less sentimental about that at the time, I think it would have saved us a bit of sort of time and drama and like us kind of worrying about like how we handle that dynamic. Sorry, that's a whole like juicy big topic that we haven't talked about at all. But definitely there's an element of that. That's because I guess like, and then the pandemic I think is something that's obviously been a massive challenge. And I think if I'd known way back in April that it was going to last as long as it has, and it wasn't just going to be the sort of 6 weeks, 2 months kind of thing that we thought it might have been at the time, possibly we'd have made some different decisions there too. But no, I think truthfully, as I say, you kind of, a lot of these mistakes you make and they're kind of necessary. Actually, I tell you what, I can give a more general piece of advice that I need to give to founders, which is a lot of whenever startups come to me for advice, a lot of them I think tend to really like over-fixate on the product aspect of a business and under-fixate on like the marketing element. And I think that is something we found to be true with Stasher and again with 3 Points. Products, I think more and more are kind of the easy part. Like it's natural to fixate on it because it's kind of fun and it's so within your control, right? And you have that sense of like building and creating something, and that's great. Like you love to see that. But I think the marketing thing is something that people like systematically underestimate how difficult it is. It's really, really hard to like find and convince customers to part with their money over your product. And it's probably only getting harder as the internet becomes more and more like saturated with content. Like it's more noise to stand out in. So having like viable sales channels and ways to market to customers is something that we were lucky with in Stasher because, like I said, it was a niche product. It was early days, and we could advertise profitably on Google like no one else was doing it. But that's not true for every product in every market, and certainly for 3 Points that doesn't prove to be the case. We have to be a little bit more creative about how we reach people. And I guess that's a B2B sales process, so that's kind of nice. But like, yeah, it's sorry, that's actually probably a better answer. I'd say that like worry.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that like you said, a lot of people think about building the product, and then the afterthought is how do we actually like market this and find customers when, you know, the greatest product in the world that nobody knows about is not that great.
Yeah, whereas you could take a really like bang average product, the best marketer in the world, and I'm sure it would actually do pretty well. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for that.
And I actually see that all the time. Talk about minimum viable products is products that, you know, the great product people out there would be like, what a horrible user interface, or what, you know, bad this, but it's out there and it's being sold because they have a good go-to-market strategy and they have a good marketing strategy, and you know they were able to overcome the product challenges versus someone that has a great, fantastic UI, great, fantastic product, but no one knows about it. So it's always interesting.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, just would love to hear where people can, you know, find more information, pay attention to what you have going on. If you want to share websites and where you're active on social.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to catch me. Full name is Jacob Wedderburn-Day, but you can find me by looking up Stasher or Tree Points. Stasher is stasher.com. Tree Points is treepoints.green. Both have like the full suite of social, like Facebook, Twitter. Definitely check out the Instagram. Actually, the 3 Points Instagram content is pretty cool. The guy we've got running that is, yeah, he's really great. He's got some really like beautiful visual content, some cool videos. So definitely worth a look at. But yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn, or jacob@stasher.com is probably the best email to get me at as well.
Well, awesome. We want to say thank you, Jacob. This has been fantastic. Appreciate your time here today. And thanks for everyone for watching.
No, my pleasure, guys. It's been a pleasure to be here. Sorry about the little charger incident, but no, it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it.
Add some fun to it. Thanks, Jacob.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everybody.